us in the Movieland Spotlight is Jim Field Smith, a director from the United Kingdom, known from his work in the TV series Hijack on Apple TV. Thank you so much for joining us today, buddy. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Can you tell me a little bit about how you got started in the film industry and who inspired you?
I kind of got started in the film industry by accident, really. I suppose the person that inspired me was my old friend, George Kay. We'd always kind of mucked around doing stuff together, and he and I had always talked about making stuff, and that's all we'd ever really done, really, when we were kids, just kind of mucking around, writing stupid magazines. We made a stop motion short film together. You know, he went off to art college and I went off to university, and we obviously were still good friends and still carried on talking. And he kept saying, you know, when you graduate, come to London and let's see if we can make a go of things. And we did. We lived together for a while. We were both working kind of at the bottom end of the TV industry, but getting to work with some incredible people. And I was doing a lot of comedy to start with. I was writing and performing comedy. I was in a sketch group that was pretty successful for a while. And over time, I just kind of slid sideways, if you like, into directing. I realized that kind of that was the best use of my skills, and it was the thing I had the most fun doing. But I hadn't grown up wanting to be a director. I hadn't been like running around in my backyard like Steven Spielberg shooting, you know, Super 8 films or whatever. I was into music. I was into art. You know, at one point I wanted to join the army and fly helicopters. So, you know, I was kind of all over the place, really. And, you know, there's a lot of pressure on kids these days to kind of say what they want to be and what they want to do. And I feel it with my kids, you know, having to make choices at such a young age about what they want to do. And I think what was lucky for me is I didn't really have that pressure. And also I didn't have some burning goal, some big ambition of wanting to be a movie director. I think probably if I had, I might have ended up being disappointed, but because I came at it kind of from underneath, I sort of organically emerged as something that I could do and something that I enjoyed doing. And so I was experimenting, you know, we were making short films and sketches and just kind of with zero pressure attached to it. I think really that was in hindsight, a really lucky training ground for where I've ended up, because I wasn't, you know, I didn't go to film school. I didn't kind of learn all these sort of techniques and have all this kind of, like I say, this sort of pressure to perform, or pressure to succeed rather. So yeah, and so all the sort of breaks I had and all the sort of success I've had in my career, I've always been able to be quite zen about it, because it's not been some giant strategy really. It's just been a case of taking things as they come and sort of growing and learning from each project. So yeah, a bit of a long-winded answer, but it's a question I get asked a lot, and people want me to say, you know, I studied this director, or I went to this film school or whatever, and I did none of that really, and I came at it from a pretty obscure angle, I suppose.
Glad to hear that you're having fun doing it, and it's just something that doesn't feel pressure, because that's one thing that makes making any kind of art, you know, hard to do is pressure. But it seems like you are doing these shows at ease at the moment, and especially the films that you do as well. So yeah, I highly applaud what you're doing, and keep at it for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, so you have a pretty intense show at the moment, currently with its second season on Apple TV, Hijack. Tell me a little bit about how the show came about.
Hijack came about just out of an initial thought from George, who I mentioned before, who was stuck on a train once. And this is ironic given season 2 is set on a train. But season 1, which is set on an aeroplane, came about because George had been stuck on a train, and he was looking around at all the passengers in the carriage, sort of wondering how each of these people would react to if the situation was more serious than the one he was currently in. And we talked about it, and we sort of transitioned it over onto an airplane, and George was saying, you know, what if we set a show on an airplane, and could we do that? Could we do 7 hours of real time on an airplane? Well, I suppose one of the great things about our relationship was always that he would say, do you think this is possible? You know, and I would bring a little bit more of my sort of filmmaking knowledge into it and say, well, we can definitely do this, you know, and give him the confidence to move forward with the idea. And so that was really, you know, we'd made a show called Criminal for Netflix, which is set entirely in an interview room. It's a show I'm very, very proud of. And it's a police crime drama, but it never leaves the confines of the police interview room. It was a very sort of contrary exercise in a way. It was like, how can we make something in an era where everyone wants bigger scale, production value, locations, set pieces? We kind of went the other way and said, what if we told a big, ambitious crime drama, but just in one room? And you put the crime and you put the events into the head of the viewer. You allow them to picture what's happened through the words of the suspect and the questioning of the detectives. And it becomes this kind of very intense forensic cat and mouse between suspect and detective. Looking back, Hijack is just like an extrapolation of that. And at the time, we sort of said, well, Hijack is criminal with wings. It was us, I suppose, flexing that muscle a bit more and saying, like, what if we did this same thing and created this pressure cooker, and you create this kind of petri dish where you can examine your characters and you can put them under the microscope. Because like I said, with writing and directing film and TV, there's often an instinct to go bigger and to go bolder and to throw your characters through a bigger and bigger assault course of problems. If something is too big and too noisy, you sometimes can't really explore character within that, because what you're actually doing is you end up servicing the plot or the story, and you're not interrogating the characters. So Hijack, although it is a big, thrilling, action roller coaster in lots of ways, it's also this kind of character study of Sam Nelson, who's played by Idris, and putting him under the microscope and seeing, and sort of turning the screw on him and seeing how he performs under pressure. So that was really the sort of genesis of the idea. Was like, what if we put one guy in a plane with 200 people, and that plane happens to be hijacked, and he has a set of skills, but they're not a Liam Neeson set of skills. They're they're a slightly more cerebral set of skills. And so that really that was the genesis of it. And so the other side of it was wanting to kind of reflect society on the aeroplane. So you've got all the different sort of classes on the aeroplane. You've got kind of everyone from all walks of life jammed together in this space for 7 hours, and it's an opportunity to see how to examine human behavior and examine sort of how society, it's like a microcosm of society, and see how it works. It's also a big fun show, I should say. I've sort of over-intellectualizing it here. But, if you want to make something that's kind of big and flashy and fun, you do have to intellectualize it as well, because otherwise it becomes kind of meaningless. So we wanted it to kind of deliver on the thrills, but also have a little bit more substance to it as well.
Spectacle is great in shows and special effects and crazy things happening, but simplifying idea with like modern, real life tension, situations that would really play out is what you're going for here, especially with your criminal show. And I think that is really what captures it. And the way you're explaining it may make some people think, oh, it's a little boring, but it is definitely not. It definitely holds you on the edge of your seat, the tension, the anxiety, and the show is carried brilliantly by Idris. And he plays that, the calm guy in the stressful situation very well. I gotta say, like, he's done a lot of great work in Hollywood. What was it like working with him on this show?
Well, it's great, and you've put your finger on it, really. He's the kind of center of calm in the universe of the show. I often refer to him as kind of like he's sort of the sun in the universe, or the moon. He creates this kind of gravitational field, and everything kind of orbits around him. And actually, the more when we started making season 1, we really lent into that. The more I felt that on set, and the more that we worked together across, it took a year to shoot season 1, and over that period of time, you sort of get to know someone's strengths, and you also get to observe how other people move around them. I get to, be just a few inches away from him. Often I'm operating camera, and so I'm right there with him, and you really get to feel how he breathes. And so that became a really instinctive, organic part of the process, was sort of building the show around him. Of course, when it came to making season 2, we were in even better position, because we had all of that sort of knowledge of what we'd achieved in season 1. And I was also wanting to explore things that we hadn't been able to explore in season 1 with him. So And so did he. We were both very, very keen to push the character into a much darker place and to have him asking and answering some much more difficult questions. In season 1, he's stuck on the plane. He didn't choose to be in a hijacked plane. He's just trying to get from A to B, and his plane is hijacked. And he's got very selfish goals in season 1. He's just trying to get home. He starts out with these very, very selfish goals. And in season 2, we wanted to make him slightly more the architect of the problem rather than a passenger in the problem. And of course, as you discover as you're watching the season, it's not as simple as it seems. When the show starts, everything is not as it seems, and you realize that he's in an incredibly complex, morally complex situation, and he's trying to work his way out of it without people getting hurt. And so that was really fun to kind of learn from him in season 1 and learn what was so great about him and working with him and what his real strengths are, and then being able to lean into those in season 2. And it's not often you get to do that. Usually, with a movie, it's kind of one and done situation where you either get it right or you don't. I've made many things over the years and you don't always get it right. And you sort of look back at things and think, I wish I'd had another chance to kind of explore this or explore that. And with Hijack, what's been so great is, season 1 was a huge hit globally and really resonated with audiences all around the world, which is such an amazing, I'm so proud of that. I'm so proud that we made this British show. That for me, the best thing about that, other than sort of enjoying making another season of something that people like and knowing that there was a kind of audience there for the show, the best thing about it for me was being able to explore and push the show into a different place and to, I don't want to say fix things, because we weren't fixing things, but there were things that we weren't able to address in season 1 and we are able to address them in season 2. And so you actually end up creating this kind of more completist, this fuller picture of a character, than you get from season 1 alone.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm glad you flipped the script, because when I first seen the poster of season 2, I'm like, he's going to be one of the unluckiest persons in the world to be like on another hijacked vehicle. I thought he was going to be on a train being hijacked. He's just, not again.
Yeah, that's exactly that reaction was what we knew would happen. And so, and quite rightly, by the way, like it's absolutely correct to have that reaction. And I knew that reaction was coming from the audience. When they hear it's coming back, there was a sense of like, well, I like that show, but why are they bringing it back? Like, how unlucky can a guy be? And actually I posted on socials the day we announced the show was coming back. I literally posted a picture of Idris saying, how unlucky can one guy be? But what was fun was we knew we'd get that reaction. And so you immediately start thinking, well, how can we subvert that? Or how can we lean into that reaction? And actually all of episode 1 of season 2 is a kind of a love song to that reaction. I really wanted the audience to be watching episode 1 going, surely he's not just getting on a train and the train is being hijacked. And every scene and every moment in episode 1 is built towards that reaction. So I deliberately recreated my own opening of season 1 in season 2. It's the whole of the opening sequence of season 2 is a direct quote of the opening sequence of season 1. I wanted there to be this feeling of like, surely lightning's not going to strike twice. And sure enough, he looks fidgety and there are people acting suspiciously and Sam is noticing those people act suspiciously. And there are employees within the system who seem to be acting suspiciously. And like, it's all very, very deliberately constructed to give you, to lean into that reaction. And it's a little bit cheeky because it's there for the people that love the show, and it's also there for the cynics as well. I'm trying to trip up the cynics a little bit. I'm trying to say like, we do actually know what we're doing, and we're not just making something for the sake of it. And so hopefully by the time you get to the end of episode 1, and as without spoiling anything for those people who haven't seen it, there is a pretty big twist at the end of episode 1. The idea for me, and what's great about Apple, is they drop the shows weekly rather than dropping the whole season in one hit. What I wanted was for people to get to the end of episode 1 of season 2, experience that twist, and then they can't watch episode 2 straight away because it hasn't come out yet. I mean, as we're talking now, it is available, but at the time where the season premiere debuted, you can't watch the next episode. And so I knew that would happen. And so I knew that there would be a what the hell reaction at the end of the episode. And then what I wanted was for people to go back and watch it again. If you watch episode 1 again, you realize that everything you were watching was actually something else, and it was a build up to that twist. And so all the groundwork in the episode is doing two things simultaneously. It's messing with the audience and saying like, oh, it's happening again. But actually on a second viewing, you realize, no, it's Sam doing something very, very subversive. And every scene and every moment has a purpose that is not what you thought it was when you first saw it.
Oh, the setup was great. It had me fooled, so I was one of them going, really? But yeah, I like the anxiety he has there, though. So it's like he's traumatized by the first one. And I honestly think it still would have worked if he was still in that scenario. No spoilers. Yeah. But yeah, I'm glad you're doing something different there. But
you also can't make season 2 without quoting season 1. You know, you can't. Yeah. You can't say, oh, here's a guy who went through an incredibly traumatic plane hijacking.
Yeah.
You can't just go, okay, season 2, you know, wipe the slate clean, new day, what's happening? You have to make it had to connect intrinsically to season 1. And so
I was very late actually checking out the first season, which I only got to see a few months ago. And I was really surprised to see how great it was, because I was kind of knew it was there, but kind of avoided it thinking, but I was very surprised how great it was. Loved it. Edge of my seat the whole time. And honestly, did not see a season 2 on the cards, but was it always a plan?
No. And actually season 1 was very much conceived as a kind of one and done situation. Because if you look at it, that is the concept. It's 7 hours on a plane. It was a very neat concept. And we actually had a much more definitive ending to season 1. In terms of that character, there was an ending, let's say, that you would not have been able to do a season 2. And Apple, you know, about halfway through production of season 1, there started to be some conversations in the sort of in the realm of, oh, you know, maybe the ending could be a little bit more open-ended. And George and I were like, why? They were like, well, you know, just maybe it would be more interesting if it was open-ended. So we knew there was we knew what was coming. So everyone involved, they actually told us they wanted a season 2 ahead of season 1 coming out. So although it was a big success, they put their faith in it, you know, before it actually was out in the world, so which was really great. And so we were already thinking about season 2 whilst we were finishing up season 1, which was really helpful because it did mean we were able to leave a few stones deliberately unturned. Really, really hard to wrap up that show. You know, the problem with a real-time show, and I've made a few of them now, is that you are stuck in your own format, and I'm an absolute stickler for it with everybody involved, all the writers, all the editors, the cast, everybody. I have to enforce that. I have to say, no, it's a real-time show. We can't jump to this. You can't cheat this. So when that plane lands at the end of season 1, you can't cut to 2 months later, or we can't even cut to like it's an hour later and everyone's sitting around in the hospital. You know, you have to keep going. It was really, really tough, both for the writers and for us in production and also in post-production, to keep that episode going in terms of its timeline, but also believably have things wrap up. And that meant knowing that we were coming back for season 2 meant that we could leave a few things a little bit more unsolved in the edit, because it was like, well, we can take another run at that next time around. We don't necessarily need to wrap up this or wrap up that. It was definitely sort of freed us up a little bit in that sense.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, did you feel any pressure to go bigger this time, or was it more finding new ways to build tension?
You know, having a successful show is you know, it's like a band having a successful album, and everyone talks about, you know, second album is the hardest one to do, and or at least an album after a successful album. And it's a little bit the same way. You know, we sort of, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't, really. And so part of me has to just put all that aside and say, well, get that out of your head and just think, what's the most interesting story to tell for the audience? And then there's a selfish part of me that says, what's the most interesting thing for me as a filmmaker? Because I've got to spend 2 or 3 years making this thing. So I don't want to embark on something that's where I'm gonna run out of creative energy halfway through.
Yeah.
I've got to pick a road that's gonna, give me enough interest. And I'm also always wanted to push myself as a filmmaker and explore different techniques and do things that I haven't done before. Because I always feel like I do my best work when I'm doing something I haven't done before. And I think that's true of most people, actually. I think I try and push everyone that I work with. I try and sort of push them into a slightly uncomfortable zone and say, like, I know this sounds hard, and I know you're all everyone's kind of tensing up when I tell them what the idea for season 2 is, because they're like, oh my God, everyone's imagining, okay, we're now going to spend the next 2 years making a show set on a train. And everyone in film and TV has done a scene or a few scenes on a train, and everyone knows how much of a nightmare they are. And here's me saying, guys, we're going to set the entire thing on a train, and not just any train, an underground train. And it's in Berlin. Of course, there's a big intake of breath from everybody. With the right collaborators around you, once everyone gets over that initial shock, then okay, let's figure out how to do this. And that's when people do their best work, and I think that's when you get a really good end result, because everyone's striving for the absolute best version of the thing rather than the kind of laziest or quickest version of the thing. If we'd done season 2 on another aeroplane, which we could have done, that would have been another way of subverting it, is to say, yeah, we are going to go again, and it's going to be on an aeroplane. How do you like that? But if we'd done season 2 on an aeroplane, we'd learned all those tricks on season 1. We wouldn't have been teaching ourselves anything new whilst making the show. And, I think we would have sat back a little bit and we wouldn't have been doing our best work. That's a big thing for me. It's like changing the playing field a little bit and, saying, guys, it's not going to be the same again. It's going to be as hard, or if not harder again. The pressure of making it bigger is really only from myself and not from anybody else. We have the same budget for season 2. We have the same audience essentially for season 2. I mean, Apple has grown as a streaming service in the intervening period, so the audience is bigger. And it's interesting you saying you only watched season 1 recently. That's you're not in a minority there. When they started advertising season 2 on platform, season 1, this is before season 2 had come out, but when we were advertising season 2, season 1 went back up into the top 10 on Apple. So that's been really interesting for us, is that there's a whole new audience for the show that came to it with season 2. That's been really great too. So the pressure from my point of view is yes, there's a little bit of external pressure, but predominantly as a filmmaker, the pressure is me pushing myself and giving myself a bad day every day and trying to make myself do my best work.
It's definitely doing well so far, and I can't wait to see where it goes. But yeah, going into the series finale, what do you expect fans to take away from this series?
We tried to make season 2 a kind of companion piece for season 1. And so I hope, I never want anything to be too neat, and life is not neat at all. And we had to make some pretty strong choices going into season 2. We killed off a pretty major character. We had to, because we needed something to motivate Sam to be doing what he's doing in season 2. That was a tough decision. You're wedded to these things. You start making the show and you're wedded to decisions that you've made months, years previously. And so by the time we get to the end of production, by the time we're standing in central Berlin, we've got most of central Berlin on lockdown. It's the middle of the night. It's snowing. I've got hundreds of essays, cameras everywhere, boats on the river, drones in the air, huge, big set piece. You're standing there and it's the culmination of decisions you've made 2 or 3 years ago, or arguably it's the culmination of decisions you made 5 years ago when you started making season 1. You have to own that, and you have to say, okay, here we are, and we can't go backwards. I can't change any decisions that I've made at this point. All I can do is keep moving forward with all of the story making decisions we've made storytelling decisions we've made along the way. And really that sort of, in a way, makes it inevitable. One of the things I like about Hijack is that there is an inevitability to it. In season 1, they get on an aeroplane. The show is called Hijack. There is going to be a hijack within the first episode. And sure enough, the plane is hijacked, right? And there's an inevitability to an aircraft because it's going from A to B. It's only got a certain amount of fuel. It can only be in the air for a certain amount of time. And in season 2, he's not going to be able to stay on the train infinitely. There is going to come a point where the authorities don't want it to carry on anymore, and they're willing to take the risk of doing something potentially disastrous to bring it to an end. Or he, as a character, is going to bring it to an end. It can't be stuck in a permanent loop. And because of the decisions you've made, there are only certain things you can do. And, when you get to the kind of climax of these things, there's only a limited number of choices you can make. So it really comes down to execution. It's not really about what is the idea. It's more about how are you going to make the idea. And so for me, that, there is an ending to the show that is to a certain extent inevitable. But what I'm focusing on is the execution of that idea, and how can I deliver something that is emotionally raw, but also satisfying. As a director, I'm thinking, what can I deliver visually that is going to be interesting? How can I show a city in a way that hasn't necessarily been seen before? How can I show Idris in a way that he hasn't necessarily been seen before? He's generally plays these very confident characters. He's physically, an impressive guy. At the end of season 2, he is physically, literally, and metaphorically on his knees. And I've not really seen him like that before. And so that was satisfying for me, was to say, we can end this show in a way that is explosive and propulsive and gives the viewers a thrill, but also we can end it in a way that's kind of has some real emotional depth to it as well. So that's in a nutshell what I'm trying to do, and whether I'm successful or not is not up to me. That's up to other people to judge. But that's all I'm ever trying to do, really.
Well, like I said, I was reluctant to check out the show at first. I mean, it seems like a simple premise. However, it is extremely entertaining and very well cast and very well directed, storytelling and everything. So I think it is a type of show that people are going to remember once they give it a shot. I urge you guys to give it a shot. It is, especially the first one, it's not just up in the air, it's on the ground. There's so much going on, so many great characters, and it's, very well done. So I think you've done your job well, and I'm very interested to see how it pays off at the end there. And got to say, looking back now, what would be your favorite memory working on the series in general?
There's a moment in the in the second last episode, the penultimate episode of season 2, which was kind of the pinnacle of everything I've ever done really in my career, in terms of extreme number of things paying off simultaneously. And that isn't always the case. You're often in filmmaking in a world of compromise, or in a world of things haven't quite worked and you're having to think on your feet. And that is filmmaking. Filmmaking is problem solving, basically. But there was a day, actually 3 nights, where we shot at a train depot in central Berlin. It was a real train depot. It took months and months and months of planning. It was incredibly safe, what we did, although it doesn't look very safe. But to make it safe was incredibly hard, because you're working with high voltage electricity, and you're working with hundreds of people at night, in an environment that is a real working environment. It is a real train depot. It's not a set. And I've got hundreds of actors there. I've got the entire cast of the show, essentially, in one scene. Including Idris. I think we had 1.7 cameras rolling, because I wanted the scene to be filmed from the air, because there are police and news helicopters present in the scene. We also had 2 drones overhead simultaneously. And what that means is you can't hide anything anywhere, because the drone sees everything. So normally you're trying to figure out where the crew and Video Village is going to go.
Yeah.
And, we often say, well, they'll be safe if we put them over there. And you sort of do a lot of planning. But we knew, because of the location and the shots that I wanted that we basically weren't going to be able to hide. And we also only had a couple of hours each night because it was a working train depot, and the authorities there gave us literally a couple of hours each night to shoot this sequence. And it is one of the biggest sequences in the show. It's actually in the last episode, sorry, not in the penultimate episode, it's in the last episode. It's probably the biggest sequence in the show. It is definitely the biggest sequence in the show. And so to make this work, we had to convert a truck, like an articulated lorry, into a police vehicle. So we wrapped it to look like a kind of police command and control center. And we parked it up in the middle of the scene. So it's in vision. It's in most shots. You can see it in almost every single shot in the sequence. And I am inside that truck with my team and hundreds of monitors and radios. And there was one point where the train emerges from the tunnel into the train depot. So this train that we've spent 7 or 8 hours with, but for me, I've spent a year with this train, not 7 or 8 hours. Like, I've been working with this thing for a year. This train that we built from scratch in the UK to match the one in Berlin, with our entire cast on board the train, pulls out of the tunnel in this kind of huge meta moment. You know, the train is pulling into the station, and the irony of it is not lost on me. And we're all watching on the monitor as this train pulls into the station from a million different angles. And I remember turning to Ed Moore, my director of photography, who was standing next to me, and just saying, like, this is insane. Like, this is absolutely insane. This is the pinnacle, selfishly, of my career in terms of what I've been able to achieve. It's also the pinnacle of the storytelling of the show. And it's also the pinnacle of months and months and months of planning and the work of hundreds of people who've all sat down 2 years previously, and instead of saying no, have gone, yeah, okay, we can do that. And so this is the finish line of that process. And it was incredibly emotional, actually, and very draining. I found myself afterwards sort of quite low, weirdly, because it's such a high, you know. And I don't know there's much else in my career that can really speak to having sort of served on so many different levels simultaneously. It was incredibly humbling, actually, because really, you know, it's very easy to say, oh, let's set a show on a train. Off you go. Good luck, everybody. But to have hundreds of people actually agree to that and do that, and not just do it sort of the easy way, but do it often the hardest possible way because they want it to look the best it can look, is incredibly humbling for all of the sort of kudos and sort of credit I get as a showrunner and director. I really have to sort of take my hat off and bow down to everybody involved, because really I'm just there to kind of oversee it and help, you know, and get it over the finish line. But it takes an army, and yeah, I sort of felt like I was standing on a mountain, like a general looking down at his armies, and just, yeah, incredible, really. So yeah, I think that is almost definitely the my favorite moment of making this show, but also one of my favorite moments of my career.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing that end scene then, and it sounds spectacular. And yeah, it's always great to see something come to life, especially when you've been writing it for so long and spending over a year with a train. You got to have some kind of sentimental attachment to that thing. You try to cart it home with it. Is it in your backyard or something?
Well, funny enough, I've got bits of the set sitting behind me as we speak.
Nice.
Yeah, do you know what? We built that train from scratch, and you do feel attached to it in a weird way, because it's a huge amount of craft that's gone into it, and
Yeah.
and it's so perfect. And then you spend 9 months on it, and you end up with this kind of Stockholm syndrome where you sort of hate it, but on the other hand, you kind of, it's your home. But you know, we tried to be an incredibly sustainable production. Our sets are all built with a very serious eye towards sustainability, because, you know, we use a lot of wood and a lot of metal, and the film business has traditionally not been an incredibly sustainable business, a very eco-friendly business, and we are getting a lot better at that. And I'm very proud of our production for procedures and protocols and guidelines that we've instigated on our show. They make it even harder for everybody, unfortunately, but you know, we're all trying to keep this planet going as well at the same time. And also we're all trying to live healthier, you know, and so that meant that building that train had to be done in a way that at the end of the process, we knew we weren't just going to like drive that train off a cliff or, you know, park it in landfill somewhere. Like, that thing's got to come apart, and there's got to be a mind to like, oh, what can we recycle? What can we reuse? And so that train was taken apart and is now taking on a new life, you know. It's having its second life somewhere else in various different pieces, you know, which, you know, is great. I love that.
Yeah, it's crazy to think, you know, like parts of set and the movie memorabilia and all that get destroyed pretty quickly. And obviously recycling is important there. But one of my favorite movies, The Frighteners, Frank Bannister's house was actually burnt down halfway through filming it because they finished filming there. And in one of the scenes where they're actually still filming, you can see his house in the distance on fire and flames. That's not by accident. They're trying to get rid of something there.
Yeah, that's funny.
But yeah, now you've come so far from planes to trains. Can I predict if you're going for a third season, it's got to be automobiles next?
Well, listen, it's the question that I keep getting asked, and rightly so. It's every time that people ask that question, it makes me feel proud of the show, because it makes me feel people are buying into what the show is, and also it makes me feel like they are wanting to see more, you know. We didn't set out making season 1 on an airplane thinking, and we're going to do season 2 that's going to be on a train. We set out to make season 1 not thinking of it as a franchise. I still don't think of the show as a franchise. It's just we brought the character back for another story, and the precinct that we chose was a train. There's only so many things you can hijack. The word hijack implies a method of transport. So, you know, you can't hijack a telephone booth. But I think you could also transcend what the show is, because it's about the character. Like I said earlier, it's not really about, if it was a movie or a movie franchise, then yes, you would definitely have to stick with what the setup is to a certain extent. But look at Die Hard as an example, and it's a show that gets quoted a lot in reference to this show, and I'm very flattered that it does, because, you know, those remain, you know, to this day, some of the best action movies ever made, particularly the first one. And the reason that show kept coming back was because of Bruce Willis and because of John McClane. It wasn't because of, let's see what else, you know, let's wring another crisis out of New York City or out of his life. It's about seeing how that character solves problems.
Exactly.
You know, the franchise of Die Hard has, you could point to certain films in that franchise being more quote unquote successful than others. And you could probably point to a moment where people would say, well, they should have stopped there. But there'll also be plenty of people saying, it's such a shame Bruce Willis isn't making movies anymore, and it's such a shame they couldn't keep making more Die Hards. There'll be plenty of people, there'll be as many people that say that as there will be people that say, oh, they should have stopped, you know, 2 movies before they did. I think it's incredibly naive and incredibly insulting to sort of lump fans together in that way. And I think with our show, with Hijack, I don't know whether I'll make more of it. I don't know what creative juice I have in me to do more of it. I love working with Idris, and I love that character, and I would always love seeing that character in any situation. If there's appetite from the audience and from Apple to do more of the show, then of course there's a conversation to be had about it, of course. But I've only just finished making season 2. So the idea of you saying, what's season 3? Season 3 for me is going and sitting quietly in a room somewhere. I'm so lucky to get to do what I do for a living, and to do something that, as I said to you at the start of this chat, was essentially a hobby that turned into a career. That's all I'm doing, really. I'm just doing my hobby, but as a living. And so anytime I get to do it and get paid to do it, I feel very lucky. So whether that's more Hijack or whatever the next thing is, I'll be there and I'll be happy.
Oh, well, if there isn't many more Hijack, I'm definitely looking forward to what else you do. But for those who haven't, we at Movieland highly recommend catching up on Hijack, and especially the new season, available now on Apple TV. Before I wrap that, I gotta say, I think going into season 2, episode 2, Toby Jones walks in. Yes. I'm just like, villain. He's done it before. He's going to do it. I know it.
So funny. I always wanted to work with Toby, and we were talking about this one character. And interestingly enough, that character was originally going to be German. It was going to be a German character. It was going to be the German head of intelligence, or the head of German intelligence, rather. But it was a German character, and we were just kind of playing around with the makeup of some of the different characters and some of the different precincts in the show. We were wanting another English character in the control room environment, but it's not an environment that logically would have an English character in it. So we were trying to figure out ways to make that work. And we had this character called Peter Faber, who was in the control room as the head of German intelligence. And I said, well, what if we made Faber not German intelligence, but British intelligence? And he's there because Sam Nelson is a British citizen and he's on the train, without giving too much away. And you could argue that British intelligence would have an interest in being there. And so we all got really excited about the idea of Peter Faber being British. And then I said, what we really need is someone like Toby Jones. And so we went and got Toby Jones. And I said it as just like an example. I was like, what you really want here is a Toby Jones sort of type person. And then it was like, well, what about Toby Jones? And I was like, great, that's exactly who we need. Let's see if he's up for it. And thankfully he was up for it. He'd seen season 1. He'd really loved season 1. I had a really great long chat with him about the whole story of the show. And he said, all right, I'm in. And that's it's so great. He just, he elevates everything he does. And the crew, the British crew, just love having him on set. He's very much a much loved and respected figure in our business. And, everyone raises their game when he's on set. He raises the game of the show. As you've rightly spotted, it's like, let's play into what people think Toby Jones is or what he's going to be. And let's subvert that as well. So, you haven't got that far yet, so I won't spoil it for you. There's some twists and turns along the way of who Toby Jones is and what he's up to. But we had a lot of fun.
You can't fool me, but I've seen him in Wayward Pines. That's one thing with movies. I realize, most cast members who play villains all the time. So when I see them, I'm like, I don't trust him already. He's playing nice, but I'm waiting for that bass drop, and he's like, drive the train.
He's definitely a conflicted figure, and he definitely goes through the mill on this season as well. He is a complicated character in the show. He is very, very conflicted, and he has his reckoning too.
Not talking bad on him. Very, very great actor. Looking forward to it. And I'm a villain guy. I love villains. So I'm all for it. I very much appreciate a good villain. So excited to see what he does.
Me too. And that's why we made Sam kind of a villain in season 2. It's like he's such a hero in season 1. Although in season 1, he's kind of an anti-hero because he's not perfect and flawless, and he's he doesn't get everything right, and he's also a bit selfish to start with. In season 2, I was like, I can't just have him being a kind of whiter than white hero again. We've got to push ourselves. And so that was like, what if he's the bad guy? And you sort of start with that very basic idea of like, what if Sam's the bad guy? And of course he's not the bad guy, but like, it's just a really interesting thought. It's an interesting exercise, right? It's like, what if he was, and how could he be? And then that's kind of how season 2 came about, really, is because we were thinking, what if Sam was the bad guy?
Yeah, I already have a gist of where it's going. You know, he's been forced to do things by someone like that. But yeah, I watch too many movies and TV series to kind of get my own predictions. So but like again with the villain twists, I'm like say like I know what you did last summer. I'm like, who's the killer? I've already got my prediction.
Yeah, yeah. I love that audiences play detective. Like you're playing detective. Everything you're saying is music to my ears because you're 3 episodes in. I think you said you were.
Yeah, episode 3. Yeah.
Episode 4 comes out as we're speaking, comes out today. So yeah, you're as up to date as you can be on the show, and I love hearing you talk about the show because you may be right, you may not be. You'll see.
You're watching the mouse run through the maze right now.
Yeah, and I love that, I want audiences to lean in, and I want them to be saying, if they're watching it with someone, to be saying like, keep your eye on that guy. Like, I know that there's something up with him, or like, did you see or did you hear that? And even people going like, hey, just rewind it a second. I want to see that again. Like, I know that audiences play detective like that, and we definitely play around with that a lot in the show. Well,
I'm excited to see if you fool me twice by making me think it's not a villain and then it is a villain. Like, or did you play me in the interview? Because I already had it. Which one was it?
Who knows?
Yeah, excited. Very excited. All of my favorite TV shows come from the United Kingdom. I'm a very big British comedy guy. Bottom, Bean, Little Britain, League of Gentlemen, This Country, Mighty Boosh, IT Crowd, Black Books, long list. So like I very applaud of United Kingdom's work. Big fan. But yeah, here at Movieland, we love recommending movies, and I'm very curious if you could give us 6 movies to watch of your own favorites, old, new, sky's the limit.
Well, I may surprise you by telling you that my favorite movie, probably one of my favorite movies of all time, is an Australian movie, The Castle.
Right, yeah. Eric Bana.
Which me and my friends quote incessantly. And I saw at a very kind of formative part of my comedy career. And it taught me a lot about, it's just a very fun movie. And, it's what I love is it has a real heart to it. It's got this very simple idea of a guy that doesn't want to let go of his family home. And, that's such a great basic idea. And it's such a great kind of clothesline for them to hang all of these other little micro comic dramas off. And, the characterization in that movie is so great. Like, there are no characters that don't have incredible detail to them, but also it's just incredibly moving, that film, in a way that's so unexpected. And that taught me a lot about not just doing comedy for the sake of it, but comedy having real heart to it too. And I think that, you're saying you like British comedy. I do think that's something that British comedy does really well. Is it isn't just it isn't just sort of comedy for comedy's sake. It tends to have a kind of emotional core to it, or a social kind of context to it, which I really like, and I think is why audiences like British comedy shows so much. I really love Fargo. I love most of the Coen brothers movies, but Fargo is a real favorite of mine. I think it's something about, it's that little figure in a landscape. She's sort of a little dot in the snow, just trying to figure everything out. And obviously it's full of incredibly strong visual imagery, but it's also just, again, I tend to like stories where it's someone pushing uphill a little bit, it's kind of underdog story, I suppose, in a way, an unexpected hero, unlikely hero. So I really love that. I really love Vertigo. I'm not a huge kind of old movie guy, particularly. If you look at my work, I think you could argue that it's been fairly heavily influenced at times, certainly in terms of the action thriller stuff I've done. It does tend to have quite a kind of Hitchcockian influence in terms of, partly in terms of cinematography, but also just in terms of psychology and again, seeing like, I love seeing like a small person fighting against a bigger regime or a bigger problem. And I love sort of applying psychological pressure to characters in that way. And it's something that you can do really, really effectively in film and TV.
Gotcha.
Through the use of visuals and sound, and I love that. I love putting people under the screw. Holy Grail, Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Incredibly formative film for me growing up.
I love the and now for some completely different. That one's my jam.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I grew up with Monty Python, and they're obviously a few generations older than me, but my my dad was in the army, and we lived abroad, and we didn't have access to a lot of like TV or stuff. So I was introduced to a lot of stuff either late or through my dad or whatever. So he used to listen to the Goon Show, and so I used to listen to the Goon Show, which is not really at my age at that time was not really the right. It was not that it was inappropriate, but it was just like not really of my era. But it gave me a real appreciation for that kind of surrealist comedy. And the reason I love Holy Grail so much is they made that movie for like no money at all. They all went off and shot it, in really horrible conditions up in Scotland and Ireland and all over the place. And they were just a gang of guys and girls making that film and making each other laugh. And it really shows on screen because it's made with real affection, and it's, you can see the edges of it, which I really like. I like that you can feel them making it when you watch it. And I really love that because it's the right kind of movie for that. And it's also just like relentlessly funny. What's so funny is that when I'm making stuff, I don't watch stuff because I can't. So I tend to get very behind on current movies. So for example, I'm only just now catching up on like 2025's kind of best movies.
It's been a lot that year. I was blown away.
Yeah, there's been a lot. And there's also not been enough in a way, like we movie making in this country has unfortunately taken a massive downturn. Certainly indie filmmaking is really, really tough, and there's a size of movie that I love, like Anora, for example. I wouldn't say that was in my top 5, but like I love that movie, and I love the size of that movie because it's a movie that's made for a certain size and a certain price, and as a result, it's made with real passion and real control as well, like control of the filmmaker as opposed to control of the studio. Watching, like I said, Monty Python and Fawlty Towers, and then latterly The Office. And then, What We Do in the Shadows. And these are shows that have had a huge influence on me in terms of my filmmaking, which I then brought back into TV, because my first break was actually in movies. I made a movie called She's Out of My League for DreamWorks. Yep. That was pretty much the first thing I did professionally, which is mad thinking back. But I sort of came back full circle into TV and was able to kind of bring that filmmaking sensibility into TV. Yeah. But my comic sensibilities were from TV. My comic sensibilities were British comic sensibilities. Like I said, I was in a sketch group for a long time. I had a radio series for a while. And so my instincts are kind of in that world of improv and sketch comedy. And I try, and even in a show like Hijack, I try and push that stuff into the show because I don't really know how to do anything else. So, when you ask me what my top 5 favorite movies are, I've given you 3 movies, but like the other 2 slots would probably be TV shows, because I think particularly now, I love Breaking Bad, for example.
Yes, so underrated. Love that one.
And I think particularly now, TV and film is more than ever sort of visually interchangeable. It didn't used to be. You used to be able to, see a still frame of something and say that's a movie, that's a TV show. Yeah. Now,
they're bringing movie elements into TV series, which is what got me into TV series.
Yeah, and I was lucky in the UK to be kind of at the beginning of that movement here, because I'd made a movie and I came back and I made a TV show called The Wrong Mans, which was an action comedy thriller, James Corden and Matt Bainton, and I had been making movies, so I only knew how to make something like a movie. So I was like, okay, we're going to make this show. And yes, it's a TV show, but I'm not going to think of it as a TV show. I'm going to think of it as a movie. And so we had no money because it was like a BBC comedy series, but I threw every pound and every bit of filmmaking knowledge I had at making that look as cinematic as I could. And it stood out as a result. And now, of course, every TV show has the same production qualities as a movie. TV as a character medium and film as a story medium is something that I've kind of landed on as a sort of basic analysis of things, and as a result of which, you feel closer, I think, to some TV shows than you do to movies. So like Walter White, you spend 5 or 6 years with Walter White.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you feel much more connected to what he's doing and his ups and downs than you do if there was, let's say, a Breaking Bad movie. It would be fun, but it would just be
very brief.
Teacher. Yeah, it'd be very brief, and it would just be about a teacher starts making drugs, and that would be the story, and then he has a downfall, or whatever, or his whole character changes. You can't really change a character that much in a movie. It's a snapshot. A movie is like a snapshot of something. You can make the longest movie you want, but it's still only going to be 3-4 hours long at the absolute most, and so in a TV show, you've got that real estate to spend that time with those characters. So I feel like I say, you asked me my top 5 movies. I'm going to, say that 2 of them are TV shows. So, because it's more about like what pieces of visual media do I feel connected to?
I get you. Yeah, absolutely. I stand with you on that.
And also what's influenced what I do, because the two things are kind of inseparable, really. It's not so much about, I don't have things that I love and then things that I make. Like the two things are kind of, after a while, they kind of smush together, and it's hard to see where one starts and one ends.
All right, last question for you. When you go to the cinema, what are your go-to movie snacks?
Aha. Do you know what? I might be the only film director in the world that doesn't like popcorn.
Nah, I think a lot of people don't.
And everyone always says that to me. I don't like popcorn at all. And people are like, what are you talking about? How can you not like popcorn? It's popcorn. I'm like, I don't like popcorn. I don't know what to tell you. For me, I have to watch if it's a movie, I generally want to go and watch a movie because I want to go and relax, and I want to immerse myself in something and kind of switch off from what I'm doing. So I'll generally have a beer. That's probably about it. I like to, if I spend so much time perfecting the sound and vision of everything that I do, that when I'm in a cinema, if there's any light or sound distractions, it drives me insane, sort of on behalf of all the people that have made that movie.
Yeah.
So like, even with my kids, when they're opening like a
bag of chips,
popcorn or a bag, I'm just like, shut up.
Yeah.
Or like opening it like an unexploded bomb. So yeah, just a nice cold beer, and ideally a seat that reclines.
I got you. Yeah, for the longest time, I didn't take snacks into the cinema, but all of a sudden, popcorn's making a comeback for me. But yeah, strangest things people put on their popcorn, like chili and hot sauce. I was curious if there's anything in the United Kingdom people mix into their popcorn up there.
No, it tends to be pretty basic, sweet or salty. And, the sort of premium cinema experience has crept in here as well. And, you do get a lot of places now where it's like food service to your seat and stuff like that. And
yeah, same here.
Movies are meant to be a kind of something that anyone can go and see, and they shouldn't be expensive. And the movie going experience should not be expensive. And unfortunately, it is expensive. It's becoming, the movie business is struggling, and they're trying to find ways to, keep themselves afloat. And I respect that, but it's tricky. A family of 4 going to see a movie can become an incredibly expensive experience, and that's not really what it was meant to be. It was never meant to be that. So I hope that people keep going to the movies, and I hope that premium snacks don't drive them away.
You can feed them before you go to the cinema, and then you don't have to get snacks. And you remember something like that, the outing, the experience. Like, you don't remember a night on the couch in Netflix unless the movie was captivating, So long live cinema. Absolutely love it there. Well, buddy, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate your time and cannot wait to see the rest of Hijack and can't wait to see what you do next.
Thanks, man.